Well, hello, folks. This is Lowell Ann. Welcome you to Being Your Own CEO interview series. My goal is to introduce local Victorian solopreneurs by giving them some profile on Google Plus and YouTube and help them get started in this new Google world. I also love finding out what makes them tick as business people. I know that we can all learn from their observations for sure. So today I want to introduce Gina Donaldson of Personal Passage Planning. And I might just say a little bit about how we met. Gina and I had never met before. We stumbled on each other at a Yes networking event. We got stuck in the corner somewhere in a not very good situation, but we did exchange business cards and we followed up and had coffee together, a very interesting coffee, as I recall, when your dad showed up, etc., etc. But I was absolutely fascinated by the work that Gina does. And I could see some relevance to some groups that I'm connected with online, et cetera, et cetera. So I just thought it would make so much sense to do an interview with her so that she could share what she's doing. So welcome, Gina. It's really nice that you consented to be interviewed.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Loanne. Thank you for inviting me.
Right on. So maybe I'm sure our viewers will just want to get to know you as a person first a little bit. So tell me a bit about yourself. I know you've done a lot of travel across Canada. That much I remember.
That's for sure. Well, I'm originally from Toronto, but as a young adult, I headed off and joined the Regular Force Navy in personnel administration. So I spent a lot of time in uniform, but I also met my husband while in the Navy. So I did hard time as a Navy wife. And we are now both very happily retired here in Victoria. And by retired, I mean from the careers where we fell under the direction of others. And now we are very much enjoying taking this opportunity to follow our dreams and our desires and our passions. And for me, personal passage planning was a part of that. In terms of background, I've always been very empathetic to people. I have a social science degree in psychology and counseling. I'm very interested in aging and dealing with life issues as they come up. Professionally, I was trained in change management, but that was in the business world and dealing with technology. At the same time, I was the only people person on the team, so I had to deal with the individuals as well as the group psychology. And my goal is to get people through change. So in my business, now we're talking about change that happens to everyone.
Aha. And I was noticing in your notes and so forth, I immediately jumped when I saw that you had training and an interest in leading change, because that's certainly what happens to all of us as we progress through life, isn't it?
Yes, it happens whether or not we wish it to happen. We acknowledge, so I use the term which is becoming very popular these days, I notice, and that is I talk about life events. Mm-hmm. And your life event starts the moment you're born. But in terms of being an adult, you go through passages as a child and a teenager and a young adult, and then you start taking more responsibility for that. Your relationships change with your parents, with your friends, you create your own families, your careers. But we are all on this long-term journey, at least we all hope it's long-term. And along that road, there's things that we're going to decide to do, and then there's things that are going to happen to us. Mm-hmm. My business is about just accepting that there's two aspects to that. And the key one is get organized so that you can handle change, whether you've planned it or not. And secondly, be prepared for it. Because if you're not prepared for it, then other people can't help you. And this is really a big part of growing up, is taking responsibility for the changes that you create or that happen to you.
Absolutely. taking responsibility, that is such a big issue, isn't it? So
Yeah.
so I just before we kind of get into the service that you provide, etc. I did want to up front, and we may mention it again later. I did want to make sure that our viewers know that your business is called Personal Passage Planning, and your website is personalpassageplanning.com. And I found it quite instructive and enjoyed reading what you had there. So that was the first place that I went to kind of to learn a little bit more about you. So, and I found that was good. But I'm just wondering now, I know that you work with individual clients for the most part. So before we get into the product and what all that looks like, I just kind of wondered if you could tell us a little bit about your favorite client or your typical client, or the sort of person that you like to work with. And I know that you're going to say right away, I can work with my client group is everyone. but but it is useful to kind of to get kind of a picture of the kind of client that you have been working with.
Thank you very much. Well, I think the thing here is that, as you say, it's not just that there's this huge audience of people who could benefit from the service, but part of the initial conversations that I have with people, it is about there's some work on both parties. And so what I've found, I've engaged people from age 27 to 81. And the key here is I'm not doing all the work. We're about to go on a journey together. Mm-hmm. We're going to have a conversation that is going to open your mind to understanding just how much life can impact you and impact others. Mm-hmm. And what you need to think about it to take that responsibility to make it the best for everyone. Mm-hmm. So my favorite clients are ones that don't think or think they've already got it all worked out. And you go, okay, so if you've got the basics in place, and I consider the basics to be a will, power of attorney, representation agreement, great. Did you tell the people who are your executors that they're going to do this work for you? And have you made it easy for them? And
do they even know what an executor does?
Yes, do they know? And do they know their terms? And what I find most interesting is the first reaction is, it's not my problem. I don't have to worry about it. It'll be their problem.
It'll be gone.
And I think, well, it's the same thing I found professionally. You either have an overly optimistic view or a very negative view of the changes that happen. And these ahas for me are, okay, we have some work to do, but we're going to do it together, and you're going to feel better at the end. So I would say my favorite clients are ones that have sophisticated lives. That is, that they have children, they may have a business, they have people that they want to make sure benefit, like heirlooms or some things like that, but who've also had nobody else to have this conversation with. Mm-hmm. And that is, I've been through a lot recently. Like 2 of my clients recently lost their wives, and they just need someone to talk to have a conversation that nobody else in the family feels comfortable having.
Yeah.
So I get my most benefit of being that person that people can trust to have a very confidential conversation, but move beyond the conversation to creating something that puts their minds at ease, that, okay, my house is in order, and it's in order today, but I'm going to keep it in order going forward. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah. So, well, and I mean, I'm guessing that some of the clients that you meet are totally disorganized, and there
Yes.
are others who are sort of organized in their thinking, but haven't really gone far enough in their thinking.
And this is very typical, particularly I find of professional groups. So having been in a very busy professional myself, I appreciate that some people are very organized professionally, but at the end of the day, they haven't got much left to really do all the things that they know they should do. And so one of my clients, very professional, you know, that world at the office is completely different than the world at home. And so I had no problem at all saying, that's okay. It's a big mess, but we'll just sit down and we'll quietly go through the whole stacks, all these stacks of paper, and we will put it together gradually, and then we'll figure out what else we need after this. And there's such a relief, first of all, of not being judged, because that's really important. Absolutely. And second of all, just that sense of somebody had to help me get to this point of action, because I never allow myself to look after me. I'm always busy looking after my clients. Right? So, yeah.
Well, I mean, as we're talking about this, I can still see my mother when she was living. She had a big sign on her fridge door that said, "Someday I'll get organized."
Yes, and if you're if you're professionally oriented that way or personally oriented that way, you probably always have this sense that it could always be better. But the thing is, what's better for you, okay, sometimes you have the time to do that, but also, how is somebody else going to understand your view of organization? And you talk about my clients. I would say some of my favorite experiences are actually that I had as a junior officer, in that filing systems. In the forces, filing systems are designed much like a library, in that there's numbers, and the numbers are uniform across the organization, and it's very specific. Well, as a junior officer, I had the opportunity to go into an organization and having to blend it, and part of it was we had to blend our files. And we discovered that the person who was in charge of the other organization's files decided not to follow that program, so because there was a power associated with privatizing so only one person can access. And I think that's one of the fun things about getting into this business, because whether you're single or you're in a family, there's a bit of privacy and power that comes with being in charge of the family documents. And I may know where they are, but if my husband doesn't know where they are and he needs them, how hard is it? So even though I feel really good about I can put my hands on something in 5 minutes, as this woman could in those days, but she was the only one who could, you know, it is about making sure it's not just about me. And as the person who had to look after all the family home front security, while my husband's at sea, I had a really good system. But it wasn't necessarily good for anybody else. So I know how much work it is to do this, but now we have the benefit of being able to go to almost any circumstance. If we run into a healthcare issue, if we want to change financial advisors, if we want to understand our life insurance, anything. We now have one place to go where we both have a shared understanding. And as things change from year to year, we've got a handle on it. And we're both in charge. So.
And I mean, some things can really slip away on you. I know that just recently I was trying to get to the back end of my website and the FTP site, and I realized I didn't have the password. And I'm very organized about passwords. And I'm very perplexed by the fact that I did not have that password. And I think it's probably because I implemented a filing system for passwords after that first thing was done. And so, yeah.
Well, it's, you know, I would have to say that I'm pretty good. I mean, I've come from a IBM where we had more passwords than you can imagine, just professionally. And they had to change every 3 months. So it was a constant battle to stay on top of those things. But passwords are a very tricky point in our lives now, because our personal computers are not usually shared with the family. Our phones have passwords, and so much is locked up there. Not only can you get yourself locked out, but if your family needs to have access to those passwords and they can't even change the utility bill or see the utility bill, then you are really locking people out. And there's been some interesting cases where families can't even access their music that's been paid for because they don't have the original password that the person who set it up for the family. And some women I've spoken to, it's 2 years later and they're still trying to get into certain sites to figure out what is there. So passwords are very much, and they slip by on you.
Yes, they do. And so I'm glad this kind of came up, because I mean, some of the things that you're going to probably talk about in your life log, you know, those are the usual things like wills and all of that. But all of these other little pieces are things that quite often, I'm sure, people don't think of. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so easy to get tripped up by that. Even when people think they know their password, sometimes they're not sure. But we have so many things that now we're getting through e-statements and online banking. Investments may not be obvious. So if you're someone coming into looking after somebody's estate or even your own, you can keep track of those things if all the money's working well. But the moment something happens, like your income is cut off or you're having to move, now you need to go back and retrace. Or if your wallet is stolen, that's a pretty common thing. If your wallet's stolen, okay, do I actually know how many things are coming off my Visa account every month, every quarter, once annually?
Yes.
Or do you wait till you get the "you're a bad person" notice, you know? And these are the things that I encourage people to think about. And it's not about me knowing your passwords. There's lots of ways to manage passwords, but it has to be in a place where it's comfortable for you due to the complexity, and that if necessary, somebody else who you trust, and this is key, can get into those things so that they can manage your affairs in the way that you would want.
Yes. So that's a good example. So we've talked about your favorite client. So let's talk about your product, because when you and I had coffee, you brought the binder, the I guess you call it the life log.
Yes.
You brought that with you, and I mean, for me, just flipping through it and seeing what examples of all the things that were there, I just went, ding. Oh, because for myself, I have a lot of things organized. For example, one that you just mentioned, all the fees that come off my credit card on an annual basis. You know, and I know what they are, where they are, and how much it is, and all of that. But I'm sure nobody would ever find it because it's buried in my computer somewhere. So so to have a physical binder that is organized in a very obvious kind of way really does make a whole lot of sense, because as you said, the other person may not be as computer literate as I am. I've discovered that most people that I know are not nearly as computer literate as I am. So I'd better put it together in a way that somebody who doesn't know a thing could handle. Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about this life log.
So the life log is actually the product. I would say that the service is really about creating an understanding for yourself. So what I do is I take you on a conversation into all these aspects of your life, everything from legal, social, insurance, investments, all social aspects, which include your family, your wishes, your volunteer community work, who your friends are. So, and then finally, advanced care and end of life, so that no matter how old you are, you know what you're going to do if you get hurt, and who's going to look after you. So it's, the key thing is you have that conversation and you create an awareness. I take people through every single detail that I've ever been able to think of, and sometimes a client will find an extra one for me. But to create something like the life log, so this is, you know, it's a binder, okay, and it has chapters, and this is just a sample. It's not very thick.
Look at it all.
But if I was to pull down my life log for you, my life log has this much paper in it. And the key thing here is that is creating that one resource. And you find that even if you think you've remembered everything, time goes on, you're going to start remembering. A bill comes in the mail, you go, oh, I don't have the security system bill in my life log yet. Better get it in there. So it's not meant to be something that, you know, we used to talk about, put your important papers in a shoebox and mark it in case of death, open now. This is about an ongoing management of change in your life. So as you create new investments or old investments, or even if you're just looking back at how much did my insurance cost last year, you can actually compare and get an understanding of that there's this growing impact of change on your life. So your MSP went up, your property value went up, your taxes, what's going on? Because all of those little things may trigger you to take another action that if you didn't have this total view of your life, you might not otherwise take that action. The other thing is when we look at what's happening with kids and phones, how many of us still have one of these old-fashioned things called an address book?
Not me.
All right. So if I need to phone your family, how do I find your family?
Right.
So sometimes you have to create a record. Well, how do you want to create that record? If you want to create it on your computer and download it once a year and put in your life log, because we gain friends and we lose friends, and we gain family and we lose family. But it should be accessible so that if somebody needs to help you, it's there.
Do you know, Gina, something that just jumped to my mind that's really relevant to this conversation? I'm very technological. Everything I have is recorded in some electronic way. If we were ever to have an earthquake or a big disaster or whatever, it is going to be really important to have a paper document somewhere, a paper collection. Yes, nice to have all the electronic things that speak to it. You know, this piece speaks to that piece and all of that. But so when you were talking about that, I was thinking about my grab and go bag that I have for earthquake.
Right.
And I have a little small binder inside of there with all of my friends and family addresses and phone numbers and all of that. So I mean, that seemed to make a lot of sense for a grab and go bag. But as I think about this, and you're pointing up all these other things that would be in this life log, oh my goodness. I mean, as I think about the possibility, I mean, what would happen if all of our electronic stuff fell down?
Yes, exactly.
Something, wouldn't we?
Because even if you, like, let's say your computer, you haven't got time to grab your computer, or your computer gets destroyed.
Yeah.
You're going to start having those conversations about, okay, what's your bank account number? I don't know.
my computer knows it.
My computer knows it. So, and you know, even we don't even have to go as far as a natural disaster. We can just go to, we've all had hard drives that crashed that nobody could recover.
Yeah.
I would say my mother's, who spent decades putting together our family genealogy on the computer, figuring it would be good forever. She could not recover that from the hard drive. And there was no natural disaster. It was just a disaster of energy. And, you know, we rely on our phones thinking that that'll work. But if your phone gets broken or crashed, now who are you going to call and who's going to be able to call you? So
yeah.
I like to joke around that paper is the new app, but paper is what lasts. You know, even some of our, if you look at some of your old receipts that are printed on thermal paper, they're gone. Some of our pictures of recent printing, they're gone. So you really do have to take an approach that will outlive technology. Yeah. Anybody remember an 8-inch disc?
Right. Oh my goodness. Well, so and I mean, there are so many things that we could cover. What about all of what about what happens with our Facebook thing? I mean, what how does all that online stuff get handled by somebody else? You know?
And this should be part of the discussion, because for some, and there's some interesting things cropping up. So let's talk about Facebook and LinkedIn. Do you wish people to be able to see things pop up in your Facebook or people to reach out to you? That is one option. But I personally found it very disturbing when friends that I've had who've passed away show up on my LinkedIn and I'm asked if I would recommend them. And I just want to reach out and say, would somebody please close down this account? Now, as a treasured memory, as a family, you might wish to keep, let's say, your wife's or your son's Facebook so that you can review. But that's a choice that the Facebook owner needs to make and needs to tell you what they want to do.
Yeah.
Because, and this should be part of your wishes, like people, this is why we cover this in the social aspect, is what are your social media accounts? Because people have many that sometimes they can't even keep track of them. What are your passwords for those? And what are your wishes if anything happens to you?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Have I ever got a lot of work to do?
We all do.
So
it's like doing the dishes. We just have to do our own dishes.
Yes, we do. That's a good way to put it. I like that. So I'm looking at our time here. We did sort of say we would try to keep it to 30 minutes, and we're almost there. And we've only just barely scratched the surface. But I did want to give you an opportunity to mention anything right now that you wanted to promote. It's something that anything that any offers that you might have, or anything that might be useful for our viewers.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think what I would invite people to do is just go to my website. It's very straightforward, personalpassageplanning.com, and get a sense of why this might make a difference to you and for your life, and to understand what life events are, and to just to quietly reflect on that. If you contact me and you have questions, it's a 30-minute complimentary interview. We can have that one-on-one discussion. But the other thing is, if you have a group and you feel more comfortable in a group, I'm also available to conduct presentations for groups. I partner with combinations of lawyers and investment people, and occasionally people who have pre-planned funerals. I have such a wide network that I can pretty much bring whatever types of people you want together to have the conversations that matter to you, so whether it's individual or not. The other thing is I will be at the 55 plus trade show in March, and I'm going to have a booth there, so welcome to you to that.
Sure.
And if
stop by and have a conversation, get to know.
Yeah, because it's all about the conversation. And I think the thing that I've really found made a difference to people is that we just don't talk about life events and being prepared for them. And if we can start that conversation, that'll make a big difference.
Absolutely. Oh, well, one of these days I'm going to get together with you and have that conversation. I just realized, oh my goodness, there's a
Well, the good news is I hope I've got a good enough checklist that'll cover everyone.
yeah, right. So, so we are at the bottom of the hour, and so I want to thank you so much for coming. We didn't even cover what you think about being in business. I mean, we could have gone on for another half hour, couldn't we?
Well, we could talk about that some other time.
Yeah, another time.
What I would say is that it's great. It's liberating. It you take charge of your own happiness, and nobody gets in the way of your success because you can go as far as you like.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. It's called freedom, isn't it?
It is freedom. I love the freedom of this kind of work.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe we will do that another time soon, Gina. So let's just think about closing now. I want to close this session with an invitation to our viewers to join my Being Your Own CEO community on Google+, where you can participate in a weekly Success Circle hangout. We're there to give and receive support and to help remove some of the stumbling blocks that a lot of solopreneurs experience. So, and of course, if you'd like to know more about my services as a solopreneur, I have a solo enterprise program. So please do visit my website at loweland.com. So this is Loweland signing off for this time.